Hi everyone, I'm Chris, and welcome to Dark Horror Diaries. Your house is supposed to be safe. Your neighborhood is supposed to be friendly. Tonight, we expose the lies. These are 3 true stories where home wasn't a sanctuary. It was a cage. We're talking stalker neighbors, unsettling late-night intrusions, and the paralyzing fear of being utterly alone when something finds you. Stop scrolling. Pay attention. The nightmare starts now. Good Will Hunting. I'm a producer for Alone, the TV show on history. This story is about a participant we had in Season 2, whose footage we had to cut. I've never felt comfortable talking about this before, especially because it opens me up for liability. After all, giving away TV show secrets is a bit of a faux pas, especially a survival show. But I feel like people should know the truth. One of the things you may not know about the show is we often have nearly double the amount of participants actually part of the show, and in editing we choose the most entertaining people and only include them in the actual season. That way we can weed out the boring people, super survivors who could literally last years alone who we have to force tap, or otherwise make them quit, and also get rid of the ones who can't even handle a single night alone in nature. That happens a surprising amount. But these people don't make for entertaining TV. Season 2 took place on Vancouver Island, a densely forested land with just as much fish as it has rain. The weather, the chill, the numbing wind took care of most of our contestants. And if you watched the season, you'd know the winner, Dave, lasted 66 days. Long, but like I said, there were other super survivors who lasted longer. We let them stay out longer as an experiment to see just how long it might take. These men all the women had tapped by then had built impressively sized cabins from the surrounding forests. All except Will, that is. That was his name. When Will sent us his application and video, he seemed like a normal guy. Well, for a survivalist, he was the kind of guy who came off as a good guy to know both at the local bar and should the apocalypse hit. The kind of survivalist who hunts for sport, but could really stay out there for some time. He had professional training, would take others on managed hunts, and spent a lot of time in nature preserves camping by himself. Really personable, and had the looks for the show too. We knew he'd be popular. But the image wouldn't last. When we picked up the footage on day 90 and reviewed it, we found a very different person. Describing his story isn't exactly easy. See, one thing about the show is these guys are really alone. Like, really alone. We drop them off. Give them their chosen 10 items of survival gear: knife, axe, tarp, fishing line, stuff like that. They get to choose the 10 items themselves, video equipment, and say good luck. Oh, and there's the emergency satellite phone they use for when they finally tap. It also allows us to track their movements. Usually, at least. Of course, out in the wild, with tall, dense forests and the typical cloud cover of Vancouver Island, connections can be tricky. We leave them be until they hit the button to come home, except in the cases of super survivors. And for Will. Days 138 were normal for Will. Compared to the others, he struggled no more or no less. Typical footage of failed fishing. Some successful drop falls away to catch small rodents. But he wasn't desperate enough yet to eat insects. From the looks of it, he was doing well. No real mental struggle. Not even a single night scare, which is what we call the footage participants take when they're awakened by a rummaging animal, usually a mouse or other small rodent. But sometimes a wild hog or bear gets nosy. He'd talk about missing his family, his parents and brothers and sister. But every participant does that. But something happened on day 58 that seemed to change Will. We know something happened on day 58 because when Will reappeared on footage on day 59, he was a markedly different person. After not having taped anything since day 39, the footage seemed to come at daybreak, with Will's face covered in blood. We figure it must have been deer blood, as he had been tracking a small group of deer that seemed to live maybe a quarter to a half mile away. He hadn't been too concerned about the local bears. They're big and dangerous, but he had only seen one in his entire time there, and wasn't planning on hunting any, and the other game was too small to be worth the energy. He was stringing up his kill, too blurry to make out the animal, but like I said, we're pretty sure it was a deer. He hadn't cooked it yet, and we couldn't see if he had started a fire. It was just him across the camp, tying the animal up to a tree so he could gut it. The video seemed to come on and off without any movement from him at all. None of the pushing the button on the camera that you would typically see when starting or ending a shot. It just stopped. The video lasted 49 seconds. The participants are supposed to tape every day and preferably as much as possible, so that we can splice together a ton of shots. Nature shots, instructional shots to show how they created their cabins, weapons, or the trinkets like necklaces that some of them enjoy making to pass the time. The next video from Will came on day 70. Will didn't look like Will. Up until day 58, he had kept a pretty clean-shaven face. He wasn't a big fan of beards and took care to use his survival knife to cut as close as possible to keep that quarterback-turned-model image we saw in that application video. But now he looked old, dirty, dried blood flaking from his face. Newer blood than day 58, but old enough to where it shouldn't be there hours or days after hunting and eating the kill. It was just different. He spoke, though. He apologized for not taking video as much as he should have. Said hunting was a little more difficult lately, and he felt like he was losing weight too fast. That he would dream of steak and of prior hunts and of family and of Thanksgiving dinner. He thought about tapping but said it was too late for that. The video ended. As he had promised, the video started back up on day 76. This time he was ranting, yelling at the forest. He talked about his food rotting too quickly despite the freezing temperatures, not being able to find any others to eat, and starving. This was far past frustration we typically see from participants. This was anger, deep-seated anger. The footage ended abruptly after he threw his hatchet at the camera. He didn't tape again until day 82. But this wasn't normal footage, not even like before. The video came on, and it's just him standing there, silent, still, not in his tent. In the middle of camp, though the video was zoomed in closely on his face. No blood anymore, and no movement from him either, not to turn on the camera, not to make sure the shot was in focus, just standing. This continued for 3 days. We thought the video must have inadvertently paused, but I am not joking. We even checked the GPS records on the emergency phone. For 3 days, Will stood in his camp without movement. Trees around him shaking in the wind. Rain and snow falling from the sky. Will remained still and looking off into the distance until the video shut off in the afternoon of day 85. The battery and video card on the camera should have ran out 2.5 days prior, but they didn't. It captured it all. We never did see or even hear any animals in the footage for those 3 days though, which was weird. To be honest, we aren't sure what happened to Will. You see, we arrived at his camp on day 90, and Will wasn't there. That's not all that uncommon. Sometimes we get there and they're off hunting. We checked the GPS for the phone, but it was nowhere to be found. We waited in camp all day until it started getting dark. We had already loaded Will's belongings, including the camera equipment, into the boat. A couple guys stayed behind in a tent to see when he'd show up. He never did. About 3 miles away down the coast, another suspected super survivor, Benjamin, had made camp. In his last scene, he's fishing along the coast, stick as a rod in hand and line in the water. He looks up from the river towards the camera, white-faced and wide-eyed, and the video abruptly stops. It was day 58. We never found him either. You'd think that having been a producer for history's Alone TV show since the beginning, you'd just about seen everything by now. But sometimes things happen that surprise you, things that you just can't find an explanation for. Dennett was your prototypical Alone contestant, a somewhat gruff but good-looking guy who grew up hunting and fishing, and ran his own naturalist survival outfit in the backwoods of Maine. He taught people how to survive in the woods for days, weeks, or even months, but did it in even more of a naturalist way, or at least that's what he claimed. Instead of bringing manufactured tools along, he insisted on bringing only tools he made while out in the wild. But what made Dennett really different from most contestants were the voices. It's not that he claimed he could hear voices, it's that we could. Dennett would take hours of video footage, as he's required to, except that there seemed to be other voices in addition to his, almost like an echo. At first we figured he might have been trying to cheat, and he had brought other teammates along with him. It wouldn't be the first time something like that happened. We've had more than a few cases of contestants trying to get an advantage by doing anything between hiding supplies in the forest and tending to them off camera to actually getting supplies airdropped to them from a small plane they arranged before taping. So I wasn't surprised we were seeing something new here, with a guy somehow arranging for friends or teammates to join him, and then just keep them off camera. except there were no friends or others around him. After we heard the voices and suspected he was cheating, the next time we went in for a medical visit, we also put up camera around his camp, unbeknownst to him, and streamed the footage into our camp, but there was no one to be found. At this point, we figured there must have been a problem with the equipment we gave Dennett, so we switched all of the gear out. Everything. All the cameras, memory cards, even the tripods. Everything. Except the voices didn't go away. Instead, when we reviewed the footage after each visit, the voices seemed to get louder and louder, though we still couldn't make out what they were saying or what the source was. All we could do was review the tape and try to remove the ambient voices as we started calling them. But things got more complicated as the voices became louder. The voices, it seemed, were coming from Dennett. Where before the voices were low enough that we thought maybe even we were a bit crazy for even thinking they were voices, now it was clear. As Dennett would speak to the camera, the other voices were talking at the same time, but were not exactly intelligible, at least not at first. We figured maybe there's a chance this guy is just duping us with some kind of ventriloquist-like act, looking for his 15 minutes of fame. Or maybe he was legitimately crazy and was having some type of psychological event. Watching the tape became more and more distracting, so much so that we started simply writing him off as a participant. We'd still do medical checks, including a new mental health check that he passed each time, but we wouldn't dedicate as much time to editing his footage as we would some other contestants. But it was hard not to watch. Admittedly, some guys would laugh at the footage, but I was more sympathetic. This man was seemingly having some type of odd psychological breakdown, or some appearance of schizophrenia or something, but was somehow passing every mental health check we gave him. We had no idea what was going on, but the laughing soon stopped. Dennett's voices became clearer. While he was otherwise doing a self-interview, explaining how hungry he was after not having had any luck with fishing the past few days, the voices were saying far more disturbing things. "We need help," it said in a loud, pleading voice. "Please help us." Another voice simultaneously exclaimed, "Get him out of here, make him leave." Except what was heard was different for everyone who watched the tape. I might hear Dennett in one voice, another person heard Dennett in another voice. No one seemed to hear exactly the same thing, just different voices or slight variations or different things entirely. We visited Dennett that night and tried our best to explain some of what was happening. He wasn't really having it. "You're just trying to get me to lose," he said. "If I tap out, then you can give it to someone who you like more." He wouldn't watch the footage. He outright refused and was getting angrier by the minute. The tone in his voice changed. "F you if you think you can make us go. Come back with this bullshit again and you'll see what we can do." We left him for the night. After reviewing the footage of the interview and hearing more of the voices pleading for help, some with impenetrable screams, some of the crew left the production camp, refusing to work any further. We didn't know what we were dealing with, but we felt like we were in danger. We also felt like he was in danger, but we didn't know how to deal with that either. At the request of the remaining crew, we flew in a local pastor, but even he didn't last through one viewing of the latest tape. He demanded to get out now, especially after his Bible suddenly and mysteriously turned damp and black, so much so that it was as if an entire jug of ink had exploded in his backpack, but got on nothing else. We had to copter him back to civilization that same day. We decided at that moment that we would reduce our checks on Dennett, and all checks would have at least 10 crew members present. For insurance purposes, we'd keep asking him for footage, but we knew he wouldn't appear in the actual show, and we would figure out how to manufacture his exit later. It never reached that moment. On our next visit, we showed up to an empty camp. No shelter, no fire, no remnants of food or someone having lived there at all, the only thing left being the camera gear strewn about the forest floor. A simple note hung from the tree that used to hold up his structure. "Going now. Watch and you will follow." The middle of his camp, where his campfire had been, was now nothing but a hole in the ground that was so deep you couldn't see the bottom. We agreed we wouldn't watch the video, and our camera operator melted the card using his lighter and then threw the card down the hole. As we walked back toward our boat, we heard a distant scream coming from his camp, and the water around our boat turned black as ink. On that day, we made a pact never to return. Years later, I heard a rumor that the cameraman had actually burned and threw an empty card down the hole, keeping the one Dennett left. When I went to ask him if the rumor was true, It turned out he had disappeared some months prior, much the same way as Dennett had. He went out camping alone, never to be heard from again. My name is Mara Elling, and people in town know me as the one who can fix anything with wood, pipes, or wiring. I rely on vibration more than sound, since silence has followed me since childhood. That silence never bothered me until the night I came home exhausted from repairing a neighbor's deck and felt a small, deliberate pulse under my feet. It was faint, like someone tapping through a glove. My house had always been steady, predictable, and that tiny rhythm cut through its calm like a warning. I crouched and pressed my palm to the floor. 3 short taps moved through the boards, followed by 2 longer ones. I frowned and stood, scanning the room even though I knew no one else lived here. When you grow up deaf, you learn to read spaces the way others read faces. The living room felt strained, like something in it had paused mid-action. I walked toward the hallway, stepping carefully, letting each vibration guide me. Another set of taps answered my weight. I grabbed my phone and set it on the floor with the camera running. I never expect to hear anything in playback, but movement speaks its own language. The flashlight cast harsh white light across the boards. At first nothing. Then a slight tremor under one plank, too small for the eye alone, but clear through my fingertips. I watched the recording, hoping it would explain what my senses were telling me, but all it showed was a faint shiver at the edge of the frame. The house felt different as I moved through it, touching walls and door frames. Older homes always creak, but this was not random. This felt like someone learning my footsteps. I signed out of reflex, a motion as natural as breathing. "Show yourself." No answer came, yet the quiet felt intentional, like someone listening for my next move. I went back to the kitchen and opened my toolbox, more for comfort than need. The weight of the metal steadied me. Another faint tap brushed under the floor, softer this time, like whoever was beneath me realized I was paying attention. I lifted one of the loose boards near the pantry, but the gap revealed nothing except stale air and darkness far below. The space looked still, but stillness can hide more than motion ever does. My phone buzzed. A message from my neighbor Theo popped up. "Need help with the basement line tomorrow. It's leaking again." I typed back, "Sure. Busy tonight." As soon as I hit send, I felt that familiar shift through the floor again, a single tap, as if responding to the word busy. I turned in a slow circle, watching the quiet house. Silence pressed against me, not comforting, but watchful. I set the phone down and stepped into the center of the room, letting the floor speak. Another tap. Closer this time. I breathed once, steadying myself, and signed into the empty air. "I am not alone in this house tonight, and whoever you are, you should hope I do not find you first." I barely slept. I kept the lights low and the floors clear, moving through the house in slow circles while letting the faintest vibrations guide me. By morning the taps had stopped, but the quiet felt staged, like someone holding still and waiting for me to drop my guard. I brewed coffee and set the mug on the table, watching the ripples tremble along its surface. Even that tiny movement felt wrong inside this house. I packed a small tool pouch before heading to Theo's place, needing space to think, needing the house to breathe without me inside it. Theo lived 2 streets over, in a place that smelled like old cedar and paint thinner. He greeted me with his usual grin, waving me in as he spoke too loudly, unaware he always did. I read his lips when he said, "Pipe is worse today. Sorry to drag you out early." I signed back, "No trouble." His basement had always been cramped, but today the tight space felt like a relief after the strange tension at home. Fixing something normal steadied me, and I focused on the weight of tools, the steady rhythm of tightening bolts, anything that kept my mind off the taps under my floor. When I finished, Theo offered me tea, but I shook my head. He frowned. "You look pale. Everything all right?" I hesitated. Telling people I felt tapping under my floor would only create worry or pity. Instead I signed "Long night." "Work stress." He nodded, but his eyes lingered on me a moment longer than usual. On my way out, he called after me, "If you need anything, just come by." I managed a smile and lifted a hand in thanks before heading home. Returning to the house was like stepping into a held breath. The air felt still, but the quiet underneath had weight. I walked the hallway slowly, palms brushing the walls, eyes tracking every shadow. Nothing moved. No tapping. No vibration. I should have felt relieved, but relief never came. I went to my bedroom, lifted the loose board I had removed the night before, and lowered a flashlight into the gap. Empty, or at least it looked empty from my angle. The crawl space stretched farther than the light could reach. I set my phone on the floor again, pressed record, and let the flashlight angle into the gap while I stepped lightly across the room. Still nothing. I crouched and watched the screen, searching for even the smallest tremor. A minute passed. Then 2. Finally, I exhaled and ended the recording. When I stood, the floor beneath my left heel dipped, just slightly, as if something below shifted weight. I froze, breath tight in my chest, and pressed my hand flat to the boards. A single tap answered. Not random. Not accidental. Slow and deliberate, like someone testing how close I was. I stepped back, and the tapping stopped again. The silence that followed felt sharp, almost focused, and I sensed with chilling clarity that whatever was beneath the floor knew exactly where I stood. I walked to the living room window and signed to my reflection. Someone is down there. The truth settled over me with terrifying certainty. If someone had found a way into the crawl space, they had been studying me, learning my footsteps, learning the rhythm of my life inside these walls. I pressed my fingers to the glass, steadying myself. This was not a house settling. This was a person waiting. I spent the afternoon pretending to go about my usual routine, moving from room to room while watching the floor with every step. I made lunch I did not eat, organized tools I did not need, and checked windows I had already checked twice. I wanted whoever was under the floor to believe I was settling back into my habits. At the same time, I kept my feet sensitive to every vibration, every shift, every faint answer to my presence. Twice I felt tiny responses, so light they could have been imagined, but my instincts said otherwise. Someone was tracking me from below, waiting for a moment when I stayed long enough in one place to risk emerging. Eventually, I stepped outside to clear my head, sitting on the back porch steps while staring at the boards under my kitchen window. From this angle, the crawl space vents looked ordinary, but I studied them anyway, searching for scratches, dirt smears, anything that betrayed an entry point. My hand brushed the wooden step, and a memory surfaced. The previous owner had mentioned the crawl space was unusually large, built during a time when homeowners stored tools and supplies underground. That made it more than roomy enough for someone determined to hide. When I went back inside, I grabbed chalk from my workshop shelf. I started marking spots on the floor where I felt the strongest vibrations, small dots I could map later. I moved through the house with practiced calm, even though my heart felt ready to kick its way out of my ribs. As I reached the hallway, I stepped near one of my chalk marks, and the board flicked with the smallest tremor. I knelt quickly and flattened my palm. Another tap answered, faint but distinct. I whispered a breath, steadying myself, then signed toward the floor. I know you are there. Silence followed, but not the peaceful kind. It hung thick, like someone below had frozen mid-movement. I stood and stepped away, but not too far. I needed more information. I headed to my workshop and retrieved a thin metal rod I sometimes used to test beam spacing. I slid it through the loose board gap and braced myself. The moment the rod entered the crawl space, something brushed against it. Not forceful, but purposeful. I jerked it back, nearly dropping it. My breath caught as the realization sank deeper. Whoever was under there was close enough to reach for anything that entered their space. I backed into the hallway and forced myself to think. If someone wanted to harm me, why reveal their presence with tapping? Unless the tapping was never meant for me to feel. Maybe he was mapping my steps, using vibration to track whether I was home, asleep, or distracted. The idea made the back of my neck tighten. I needed proof, something more than instinct and shaky recordings. I set my phone near the loose board, angled the camera into the gap, and hit record again. This time I walked away, leaving the house as silent as possible. In the kitchen I stood still, counting seconds. 10, 20, 30. Then, through the soles of my feet, I felt it. A shifting, a cautious movement directly beneath the bedroom floor. Someone creeping toward the phone. I held my breath and waited until the vibration stopped before walking back. I lifted the phone slowly, dread reaching me before I even looked at the screen. On the video, the dark gap remained still for several seconds. Then a shape slid into view. A hand, large, grimy, and moving with calculated precision. It hovered near the phone, as if checking whether I was close enough to hear it, unaware I would never hear anything at all. The hand withdrew just as smoothly, disappearing into the crawl space like it had never existed. I stared at the screen, my pulse thudding against my throat. This was no accident or hallucination. Someone had been living beneath my home, watching me in complete silence. I closed the file and set the phone down, breathing through the shock. There was no denying it now. Someone was down there, studying me, waiting for the right moment to crawl out. And I had just discovered the first piece of proof that he was not going to stay hidden for much longer. The moment I saw that hand on the recording, something in me shifted from fear to strategy. I had spent years depending on vibration to understand the world. Whoever was beneath my house depended on silence. That gave me an advantage. I moved through the rooms with care, imagining how each board felt from below, how each step sounded through wood. If he was tracking my habits, I needed to break them. I gathered tools quietly, choosing a heavy wrench, a long-handled screwdriver, and my flashlight. I slipped them into a canvas pouch and slung it over my shoulder. Every action had to feel normal, predictable, so I made coffee, swept the hallway, even opened a book for a few minutes. Not because I wanted calm, but because he needed to believe I was doing exactly what I always did. The only difference was that I marked more floor spots with chalk, creating a mental map of where his movements felt closest to the surface. By late afternoon, the house felt tense again. While sitting at my kitchen table, I felt a slow shift under the floorboards exactly where I had stepped earlier. It was the most deliberate movement so far, almost like he was testing the strength of the boards above him. I set my mug down and leaned forward, letting my feet absorb each faint disturbance. He was moving toward the hallway, then stopping beneath the loose board near my bedroom. That meant he knew it was weak. Maybe he planned to push through it. I walked toward the bedroom doorway, but stopped just short of the loose board, listening with my skin rather than my ears. The vibrations below became more focused, more calculated. He was right under me, close enough that if I knelt, my hand would be a few inches above his face. Instead, I stepped back slowly, letting the floor speak for me. In response, the crawl space shifted again. Whoever he was, he thought I was unaware. That was the only reason I still had time. I grabbed my phone and typed a quick message to Theo. "Can you stop by tonight? Need help with something." I did not explain further. I just needed another person in the house, even for a moment, to remind myself that the world outside these walls was still real. After sending the message, I walked into the living room and kept my stance light, letting each board transmit whatever was happening beneath the surface. Minutes later, another small vibration reached me. Not tapping, not testing. Crawling. Slow, careful crawling from the far end of the house back toward the bedroom. My breath caught as I realized he had retraced his path once he thought I was gone from the area. It meant he was becoming bolder. He was positioning himself exactly where he wanted to be, and I knew with absolute certainty he was preparing for something. I sat on the edge of the couch, gripping the heavy wrench inside my pouch. The house felt like a closed throat, every board hiding the intent of the man beneath it. I had spent my life mastering silence. He had spent who knew how long hiding in it. The moment our worlds collided, someone was going to make a move, and I had no intention of letting him make his first. The sun dipped behind the trees, leaving the house in a dim wash of blue light. I stood in the hallway with my hand resting lightly against the wall, letting the last traces of daylight fade while I listened through the floor. The crawl space was alive with slow shifts, like someone adjusting position in the dark. He was closer than ever. I could feel the pressure of his movements through the boards, a steady reminder that the distance between us had shrunk to almost nothing. I steadied my breathing and stepped back toward the bedroom, careful to keep my footsteps even, predictable, just as he expected. Theo texted me as I reached the doorway, "On my way." I stared at the message, a knot forming in my stomach. Bringing someone else into this situation felt risky, but letting him walk in blind felt worse. I typed back, "Knock when you're here. Do not walk in." He replied with a thumbs up. I slid the phone into my pocket, then knelt near the loose board with my flashlight ready. I did not shine it through yet. I waited. If he was preparing to come through, the vibrations would rise in intensity just before he struck. A sudden shift under my knee made me freeze. It was not careful this time. It was forceful, like a shoulder pressing upward. I stepped back and tightened my grip on the flashlight. The board lifted a fraction of an inch, just enough to show intent. I whispered a breath and took a slow step to the side, placing myself directly above one of the chalk marks where the wood was strongest. He pushed again, testing the weak spot he had likely studied for days. The tapping had never been communication, it had been measurement. My phone buzzed again. Theo, here, knocked. I hurried to the front door and cracked it open. Theo stood there with his hands shoved into his jacket pockets, concern written across his face. "Everything okay?" he asked. I shook my head and signed, "Someone is under my house." He blinked, not understanding. I repeated it slower, more deliberate. "Someone. Under. My. House." His expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "Call the police," he said. I shook my head again. "Not yet. Not until I had a chance to catch him where he could not slip away." I pulled Theo inside and shut the door softly, pointing toward the hallway. He followed my gaze, jaw tight. "You're telling me someone is under the floor right now?" I nodded. I motioned for him to stay back as I approached the loose board again. The house vibrated under my feet, heavier than before. He was repositioning, maybe preparing to break through. The idea sent cold determination through me. I motioned for Theo to hand me my toolbox. He reached for it without argument, placing it carefully beside me. I opened the box and lifted the heaviest item inside, a dense metal tool tray I used for carrying drill bits. Its weight pressed into my palms. I tested the board by tapping lightly with my foot. The vibration that answered came fast, sharp, like he had reacted to my proximity. That told me exactly where he planned to emerge. I positioned myself over the strongest beam and angled the tool tray above the loose plank, gripping it with both hands. Theo whispered, "What are you doing?" I signed, ending this. As the board beneath my feet rose again, I lifted the tray high and slammed it down through the weak spot. Wood splintered. The board cracked inward. A startled motion shook the crawl space, followed by frantic shifting. I did not wait. I dropped the tray again harder, forcing it through the opening. Beneath the hit, I felt a direct impact, then chaotic vibrations like someone scrambling backward, disoriented. I switched on the flashlight and aimed it through the gap. The beam caught a pair of eyes reflecting the light, wide and furious. The man shielded his face, blinded by the brightness. I did not let up. I kept the light centered on him, forcing him to retreat, forcing him to stumble over the uneven crawlspace floor. I motioned sharply to Theo, "Call police. Now." He fumbled for his phone while I maintained pressure with the beam, keeping the man trapped in sight. The crawlspace was shallow enough that he could not stand fully, and the loose board had turned the space into a funnel that worked in my favor. He tried to surge forward once, but I slammed the tray down again, blocking his path and sending another shock through the beams. Theo finished the call, breath shaking, and whispered, "They're coming." I nodded and kept the flashlight steady, watching the man's frantic attempts to crawl away, only to be met with brighter light and heavier strikes whenever he tried to advance. He was trapped in a space he once believed he controlled completely. I crouched above him, heart steady, every sense fixed on the shifting vibrations beneath me. For once, silence was not his ally. The distant sound of tires on gravel reached me through the window, even before the lights flashed across the yard. I felt the vibrations through the floor as the officers approached the house, heavy and confident, nothing like the careful movements beneath me. I kept the flashlight fixed on the man in the crawlspace, watching him squint and shield his face as he tried to edge farther into the shadows. His breathing was ragged, his movements uneven, and I knew the blows from the tool tray had disoriented him more than he expected. When the officers knocked, Theo rushed to let them in. Two of them followed him back down the hallway while another remained near the door, speaking quickly into his radio. The officers crouched beside me, peering into the gap I held open with my knee. When their flashlight beams hit the man's face, he recoiled like a cornered animal. They exchanged a quick look, then one of them said, "Step back. We will take it from here." I nodded and slid away, but I kept my hand pressed to the floor, feeling the crawlspace come alive with frantic vibration as the man tried to escape deeper into it. The officers moved with practiced precision. One kept his light focused on the man while the other reached through the wider break in the boards with a firm grip, snagging the collar of the man's shirt. A sharp scuffle followed. Wood strained, gravel shifted below. I flinched at the intensity of it, even without sound, watching the boards tremble under their struggle. Finally, after a tense minute, the man was dragged out through the gap, arms bound behind him, face streaked with dirt. His eyes darted wildly around the room until they landed on me. For a moment, his expression twisted into a kind of hatred that told me everything I needed to know about his intentions. One officer guided him toward the door, while the second stayed behind to assess the broken boards. Theo watched with wide eyes, hands clasped tight at his sides. I offered him a small nod. He returned it, though worry still clouded his face. The officer beside me crouched again and inspected the crawl space. He had supplies down there, he said. Blankets, tools, canned food. He has been staying under this house for a long time. The thought settled heavily in my stomach. Every quiet night, every moment I thought I was alone, he had been inches beneath me, studying the pattern of my life. After the officers finished their inspection, they asked me to recount what had happened. I explained in detail, hands moving steadily as I signed, with one officer interpreting what he could. I told them about the tapping, the tremors, the recordings, and the moment the loose board began to rise. They listened without interrupting, exchanging grim glances as the pieces fell into place. When I finished, one of them said, "It is a good thing you reacted the way you did. Another night, and this could have ended very differently." I nodded once, steady but shaken inside. Theo stayed with me after they left, helping me cover the broken floorboards temporarily until they could be replaced. We worked in silence, broken only by the soft thuds of wood settling against wood. When we finished, he rested a hand on my shoulder. "You are incredible," he said. I shook my head. Not incredible, just alert, just unwilling to be prey. He walked me to the kitchen and made tea while I sat at the table, feeling the house settle into a new kind of quiet. A clean quiet, an honest one. When Theo finally left, I stood in the center of the hallway with my palm lightly touching the floor. No tapping, no shifting, no presence waiting beneath me. The silence felt different now, softer, like a room that had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. I closed my eyes and let the stillness wash through me. My home was mine again, every board and beam. And though the memory of those taps would stay with me, so would the certainty that I had faced what hid under the floorboards and forced it into the light. I never planned to make room 409 infamous. My job as a corporate consultant required me to live out of hotels more than my own apartment, which, if I'm honest, I liked. Hotels were neutral spaces, sterile enough to forget yourself, but soft enough to feel human. On this trip, I was chasing a merger across 3 states in a week, but room 409 had other plans. I arrived late, dragging my suitcase across the polished lobby floor, heels clicking against the tile, my phone buzzing with emails that didn't stop even when I tried. The clerk handed me my key without looking up, a routine gesture I barely noticed until I stepped into the elevator. The lights flickered once, just a momentary glitch, but it left me feeling unsettled. Maybe I was tired. Maybe room 409 just looked like it belonged in a thriller rather than a hotel directory. The room itself was quiet, deceptively normal. A king-sized bed, beige walls, a small desk with a lamp, and a coffee maker in the corner. Yet something felt off immediately. I set my suitcase down and noticed the smoke detector above the bed blinking in a slow, almost deliberate pattern. My pulse picked up. I crouched, studying it closely. The blink seemed synced with my movements. My hand lifted, and the light flickered. I lowered my hand. It blinked again. I shook my head, laughing softly. "Get a grip, Harper," I whispered to myself. I unpacked quickly, my mind juggling spreadsheets, deadlines, and the odd tick of a smoke detector that refused to behave normally. By the time I brushed my teeth, the sun had completely vanished outside, replaced by the sterile glow of the street lamps. I slipped under the sheets and tried to shut the world off. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a faint clicking sound. My eyes shot open, heart hammering. It was rhythmic, precise, coming from somewhere in the walls. I sat up, listening, trying to rationalize. Maybe the plumbing, maybe the old building settling, but something about the timing made my stomach knot. The clicks weren't random. They were deliberate. Watching. Waiting. I grabbed my phone, flipping on the flashlight, and moved through the room. Nothing. No shadows, no strange reflections. Just me and the blinking smoke detector. I tried calling the front desk, but hesitated. What would I even say? Hello, someone might be in my walls recording me. It sounded insane. And yet, every instinct in my body screamed that the room wasn't empty. I finally curled back into bed, shoving the covers up to my chin, convincing myself it was paranoia. Still, I couldn't sleep. The clicking continued in the background, a whisper of metal and gears behind the vent near the ceiling. I lay there, listening to it, feeling the room shrink around me, a pressure building in the corners. And somewhere, deep in the ducts above, I knew eyes were watching. I woke at dawn with the kind of tension you carry after an unresolved argument, only the argument had been with a ceiling vent instead of a person. My mind tried to file the clicking away as an overactive imagination, but the subtle dread from last night clung to me like static. I sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing sleep from my eyes, and muttered, "New day, new merger," as if business strategy could neutralize whatever had unnerved me. I dressed quickly, choosing a blazer sharp enough to signal competence even if I didn't feel it, and packed my laptop bag with practiced efficiency. Before leaving, I glanced at the smoke detector again. The blinking had stopped, which should have comforted me, but instead it unnerved me more. Devices don't blink at people and then decide to stop unless something, or someone, interferes. Still, I forced myself out the door and into the hallway, telling myself that daylight would restore logic and routine. It didn't. Downstairs, I grabbed coffee and reviewed notes for the morning meeting. The cafe was small, minimalist, the kind of place where people sit alone pretending to read while actually listening to everyone around them. A man in a navy jacket sat 2 tables away, stirring his drink with slow, absent-minded motions while watching me over the rim of his cup. When our eyes met, he smiled. Not warm, not menacing, just knowing. "Rough night?" he asked, as if he had been in room 409 with me, listening to the clicking too. His voice was casual but probing, like he hoped I'd reveal something. "Hotel walls are noisy," I answered carefully. "Old vents, bad insulation, the usual." He chuckled in a way that made my skin tighten. "Yet the usual. Be careful up there." I wanted to press him, but his phone rang and he answered it instantly, turning his body away. That tiny dismissal felt intentional, like he had delivered a message and was done with me. The meeting across town dragged longer than expected, and by late afternoon my nerves had settled enough that room 409 felt like a distant inconvenience rather than a threat. I convinced myself that whatever I'd heard was mechanical, not human. Work had a way of dulling irrational fear. Still, when I returned to the hotel and stepped out of the elevator, a different maintenance worker than the night before stood halfway down the hall with a cart of tools. He glanced at me as I walked by. "Evening," he said, but his eyes flicked to my door before returning to mine. "Everything fine in your room?" I hesitated. "Why?" "We've had some reports of flickering detectors on this floor," he said, tone light, but his posture coiled, as if half expecting me to mention something more. "You notice anything like that?" My heartbeat quickened. "Maybe, but it stopped this morning." He nodded slowly. "Good. If it starts again, call down. Don't try to fix it yourself." His voice sharpened on that last line, a warning disguised as customer service. I went inside and locked the door, hard. The room smelled different now, like the faint metallic tang left behind when someone has handled something they shouldn't. My suitcase was exactly where I'd left it, but my toiletries were slightly rearranged on the bathroom counter. The soap I'd unwrapped last night had been moved an inch to the right. My electric toothbrush leaned against the wall instead of standing upright. Tiny details, too small to report, too small to be accidental. I whispered, "Someone was in here," and the room seemed to inhale around me. I checked the closet, the shower, under the bed, every crevice where logic assured me no one would hide. All empty, but the vent near the ceiling, the same one the clicking had come from, now had faint scratches along its metal frame. Long, thin marks like they'd been made by fingers or tools. I stepped back, unable to look away from them. I called the front desk and said, "I think someone entered my room without permission." The receptionist paused before answering. Housekeeping was not scheduled today for that floor. Then someone else came in. Another pause, longer this time. "I'll send security to check your door logs." When I hung up, I moved to the desk, pretending to work while staying within view of both the door and the vent. 10 minutes later, there was a knock. "Security," a man's voice said. I opened the door to find a uniformed guard holding a tablet. "You reported unauthorized entry." "Yes," he showed me the screen. "Only your keycard was used since last night." "That's impossible," I said sharply. "Someone moved my things." "Ma'am, sometimes housekeeping checks rooms even if no cleaning is needed. Just a quick walk through." "They weren't supposed to." I'll confirm with management, but the logs are clean." His tone suggested I was wasting time. I didn't push it. But as I closed the door, I caught him glancing toward the vent the same way the maintenance worker had earlier, as if both men knew something and neither wanted to say it aloud. Twilight sank into the room, bending shadows across the walls, and the oppressive stillness returned. I turned on the TV for noise, but every channel felt like static compared to the quiet click I had begun to anticipate. I sat on the bed with my laptop open, pretending to type, waiting for the sound even though I dreaded it. And then, there it was. A single click, soft, too controlled to be mechanical. I stood. "Who's there?" The words came out steady, but my breath wasn't. Another click responded, as if acknowledging me. I backed toward the window, phone in hand, ready to call anyone. Security, police, the front desk. Instead, another noise reached me. A low, deliberate scraping inside the duct system. Metal shifting. Something. Or someone. Moving. I forced myself to remain calm enough to speak. "If you can hear me," I said aloud, "you need to stop." The scraping paused. Then, chillingly, someone tapped the inside of the vent twice, like a person knocking from the wrong side of a door. I stumbled back, knocking my bag off the dresser, heart slamming. The tapping continued, now in a slow cadence, traveling along the ducts above me. I imagined someone crawling through the ventilation system, watching through hidden gaps, tracking me. The smoke detector blinked once. After hours of being dark, I whispered, "You're real," without meaning to. Then I grabbed my keys, my phone, my bag, and bolted for the hallway. As the door swung shut behind me, the vent made one final metallic thud, like something hitting it from inside. Frustrated, I'd escaped. Security arrived within minutes, 2 officers and a younger guard I hadn't seen before. I led them into room 409, explaining everything. The blinking smoke detector, the clicks, the scratches on the vent. One officer bent down, examining the vent closely. "Nothing inside," he said, tapping it gently. "No signs of entry beyond what you described." I shook my head, frustration and fear twisting together. "You don't understand. I know someone is here. Or was. I felt them. I heard them. And the vent, it's different." He glanced at his partner. "We'll stay nearby tonight," he said. That sounded like assurance, but I felt no relief. Being watched was one thing. Being ignored by those who should protect me was worse. I tried to return to work, but every time I typed or sipped coffee, my ears strained for the telltale click. Every sound of metal scraping or shifting air made my stomach tighten. Around 9 p.m., I finally called the front desk again, demanding to speak with management. The manager, a calm woman named Leslie, arrived within half an hour. She inspected the vent, shook her head, and explained, "The previous occupant of this room disappeared. Security removed all his equipment, as far as we know." My mouth went dry. "Disappeared? You mean?" "Yes," she said softly. "After it was discovered he was secretly filming guests. Cameras, microphones. Most were recovered, but one space behind the vent was tricky. He vanished before we could finish a full sweep." My pulse skyrocketed. The clicking, the scratches. It wasn't paranoia. It was him. Leslie's next words made my blood run a slow, creeping chill. "We've checked everywhere accessible, but we never found him. He may still be in the ducts. It's not likely, but..." She didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need her to. The reality set in. The man who had disappeared, obsessed with filming, could be watching me right now. I excused myself, retreating to the corner of the room farthest from the vent, every instinct screaming for action. My first impulse was to leave immediately, to abandon the room and stay in the lobby, or even on the street until daylight. But then a thought struck me. If he was still here, if he was watching, fleeing might make him bolder. I spent the next hour mentally mapping the room, rehearsing what I might do if he emerged from the vent. I considered every tool at my disposal, my laptop, the coffee maker, even the shower. Each object became a potential weapon. I imagined him sliding through the metal ducts above, crouched and patient, calculating his next move. I imagined the vent panel rattling as he prepared to descend. The thought made my hands shake. I reminded myself to breathe, trying to remain rational, but my mind refused to cooperate. Rationality and fear are strange bedfellows. One insists on logic, the other on survival instinct. At midnight, the clicking returned. Subtle, controlled, deliberate. I froze, trying to locate the source, heart thudding in tandem with the vent's faint vibrations. It wasn't random. It had rhythm, purpose. My stomach nodded. "I know you're there," I whispered, but the vent only responded with another click. I moved slowly toward the bathroom, thinking of a shower as cover. Steam to mask my movements and give me time to act. My plan formed quickly. If he tried to come through, I could anticipate his entry point, position myself, and take control. The room felt alive around me. The faint hiss of the air conditioning, the distant sounds from the hallway, the slight tremor in the vent. I prepped the shower, turning on the hottest water possible. Steam rose in thin, curling tendrils, filling the air with a foggy curtain that would obscure my movements. I listened, silent, every nerve strung taut. The clicking stopped, leaving only the hiss of the water. Then, a faint scraping began again from above, closer this time. My heart jumped. I knew he was moving, lining himself up. I whispered to myself, "He's going to come through." My fingers tightened on the edge of the bathtub, every sense focused on the vent. Then came a metallic scrape, low and slow, and a shadow flickered across the rising steam. My plan was simple but dangerous. I would lure him, and I would strike first. The room had become a battlefield, and I understood finally that survival depended not on escape, but on confrontation. Every muscle in my body braced for what was about to happen, a showdown between predator and prey in a hotel room no one else could touch. The shadow paused, suspended above me in the vent, like a predator calculating the moment to strike. My hand hovered near the edge of the shower, the scalding water already running, steam curling around my shoulders and blurring the outline of my body. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to flee, but I forced myself to stay still, silent, a careful observer in my own terror. The vent rattled again, a thin metallic groan as if he was testing the strength of the frame, judging his descent. I counted slowly in my mind. 1, 2, 3, every number measured, preparing for the moment I'd act. He slipped a hand through first, then his head, low and deliberate, the faint gleam of eyes catching the reflected light from the bathroom. I held my breath, gripping the edge of the tub. My plan wasn't perfect, but it was the only one I had. I had to wait until he was committed, until the weight of his body left him vulnerable. 1 inch, then another. The clicking that had haunted the room for 2 nights became a staccato rhythm in my mind, a countdown. And when the shadow moved just far enough, I swung the shower head with all the force I could muster, aiming for the metal panel and the first glimpse of his body. The scalding water hit him squarely, a hiss filling the room as steam erupted in clouds. His scream, or was it a grunt, was muffled against the rush of water. The vent rattled violently, and for a moment, I feared he would disappear back into the ducting, escaping yet again. Instead, a loud crash echoed as he fell through the metal frame, the panel bending under his weight. I stayed crouched behind the curtain, heart hammering, eyes wide, every sense on alert. The room seemed impossibly still afterward, save for the water dripping from the vent, a slow, wet reminder that the danger had finally been forced into the open. I didn't wait. I leapt from behind the curtain, grabbing my phone to dial security. "He's down. Room 409, I shouted, the words shaking from my lips. Within minutes, officers were at the door, bursting in with radios crackling and flashlights sweeping the space. The man lay sprawled across the floor, drenched and disoriented, the metal frame partially pinning him. One officer approached cautiously, hand on his holster. "Move him carefully," another whispered. "We have him." Relief collided with lingering fear, a heavy weight settling in my chest. I realized how close I had been, how easily the stalking, hidden predator could have turned the story into something much darker. Leslie arrived moments later, pale and tense. She knelt beside me, whispering, "You did exactly what we couldn't. You kept calm and trapped him." I nodded numbly, barely able to process the reality that the threat had been neutralized. Security cuffed him, and I noticed the duct panel still quivering slightly, as if the room itself had survived a battle. The man's face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief, and a part of me felt an odd fascination mixed with relief. The danger that had been abstract, hidden, and relentless was finally visible, tangible, and contained. They led him out of the room, dragging the bent metal frame along the floor. I stood in the doorway, shivering not from cold, but from the adrenaline still coursing through me. My suitcase, my neatly packed toiletries, even the smoke detector blinking faintly above, all seemed untouched now. Normal objects in a room that had felt anything but normal. The hotel staff began documenting evidence, taking photographs and resetting the vent. I realized how fragile the boundary between safety and terror had been, how easily it had been breached, and how close I had come to being just another disappeared guest. Finally alone, I sank onto the bed, the water from the shower still dripping around me, steam curling in lazy spirals through the room. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to steady my breathing. Room 409, once ordinary and bland, had become a crucible where instinct, fear, and survival collided. I thought about the previous guest, the man who had disappeared, and realized the terrifying truth. Some people can hide for years in plain sight, unnoticed, calculating. But tonight, the room belonged to me. I had won, and yet the memory of the clicks, the vent, the silent watching, would follow me for a long time. Morning light crept across the beige walls, softening the edges of the chaos from the night before. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the air conditioning and the occasional echo of the building settling. Room 409 had returned to a semblance of normalcy, yet I knew normalcy was fragile. Every sound now had meaning, every creak a potential signal. I had slept in fits, half awake, half hallucinating the vent crawling with movement. But the reality of the night's confrontation lingered in every muscle, every nerve. I couldn't shake the knowledge that, for hours, I had been the target of someone who had nothing but obsession on his mind. Security came by again, walking the hallways with measured steps, checking locks, and ensuring that all cameras and vents were inspected. Leslie accompanied them, her face tight with professionalism but betraying worry when she glanced at me. "We've taken out the vent cover, and the ducts have been cleared," she said. "He's being moved to the authorities immediately." I nodded, though the word immediately felt relative. I had caught him, yes, but for how long had he been observing, hiding, plotting? The thought churned in my stomach like acid. I realized that vigilance wasn't a choice anymore. It was survival. By mid-morning, I had showered and dressed, trying to reclaim the illusion of routine. I sat at the small desk in room 409, sipping coffee I barely tasted, going through emails with hands that refused to steady. A sense of disbelief clung to me. How had this happened in a standard hotel room? A place so mundane, so designed to be forgettable, had become a trap, a theater of obsession and terror. And yet, there I was alive, having faced the hidden predator without succumbing to panic. The thought was empowering, though a deep unease remained. I would never truly look at a hotel vent the same way again. Leslie returned with a folder of incident reports, detailing the previous occupant, his filming, and the precautions that had been taken, or in some cases failed. He was meticulous, she explained. Every camera carefully hidden, every angle mapped. Security never caught him before he vanished. I leafed through the pages, seeing diagrams of vents, sketches of rooms, and logs of guests who had unknowingly been observed. The level of detail, the obsessive patience. It was terrifying. I felt a chill, realizing that for months, this man had existed in the margins of other people's lives unseen. And now, he had been in mine. Later, I ventured into the hallway, walking past the neighboring rooms as if to reassure myself of safety. Staff moved efficiently, resetting locks, inspecting vents, recording maintenance logs. Guests passed with polite nods, oblivious to the danger that had unfolded just 24 hours prior. I noticed the old maintenance worker from the day before, giving a cautious wave. "Everything under control?" he asked, voice quiet. I nodded, too aware of the fragility of that statement. "Yes," I said. But even as I spoke, I felt the echo of clicks in my memory, the scraping metal behind a vent, and the sensation of being watched. A residue that would linger long after the room returned to its bland, everyday appearance. I spent the afternoon repacking my suitcase, methodically replacing each item exactly where it had been before the incident. Every action was deliberate, precise, a way of reclaiming control over a space that had threatened to strip it from me. I checked the locks, tested the smoke detector, and even peered briefly at the vent, now sealed and harmless. Yet, a part of me stayed hyper-aware, ready for any anomaly. Trauma, I realized, didn't end when the threat did. It persisted in vigilance, in anticipation, in the small actions taken to ensure survival. By evening, I stepped into the elevator for the last time, keys in hand, heart still tight from adrenaline and unease. Room 409 had left its mark, and as I descended to the lobby, I felt a mix of triumph and wariness. I had survived a predator hidden in plain sight, faced him, and forced the confrontation. But the memory of the clicks, the vent, and the deliberate patience of someone so determined would stay with me. I had learned, in the most harrowing way, that danger often hides where you least expect it, and survival sometimes demands immediate, calculated action. I returned to room 409 one last time, not because I wanted to, but because there were details I needed to witness, final confirmations of what had happened. The room looked impossibly ordinary in daylight, sun filtering through the blinds, dust motes floating lazily in the air. Yet every shadow, every vent, every faint imperfection in the walls reminded me of the night's terror. I ran my fingers along the desk, the dresser, the edge of the bed, imagining how he might have observed every movement, every expression. The idea that someone could watch, calculate, and wait so patiently in a space meant for rest was almost incomprehensible. And yet, the evidence lingered. Scratches on the vent frame, a displaced towel, faint water stains on the floor from my trap. Security arrived promptly, finalizing their reports and ensuring the vent system was cleared. Leslie stood beside me, holding her tablet, reviewing photos and notes with a quiet efficiency that belied the unease still present in her eyes. "He's been taken into custody," she said. "He won't be coming back." I nodded, but the words didn't soothe me. What lingered wasn't just the fear of the man himself, but the knowledge that he had existed at all, moving through these spaces unnoticed. The hotel, once a neutral and benign environment, had been infiltrated, turned into a stage for someone else's obsession. I realized, with a sinking clarity, that safety is often an illusion until actively enforced. I moved toward the vent, now sealed completely, a final barrier between the room and the man who had terrorized it. I knelt, inspecting the edges, pressing my hand against the metal. The scratches remained faintly visible, a reminder of the intrusion of the careful, hidden observation that had defined my night. I imagined him there, measuring every movement, every reaction, calculating the perfect footage in his mind. The thought made my pulse spike even now. Survival, I realized, was about timing and decisiveness. The ability to act when the threat finally exposed itself. I had acted, and I had prevailed, but the weight of that knowledge would remain. As I packed the last of my belongings, I thought about the previous guest, the man who had disappeared, and how easily a human life could vanish without warning. The hotel staff had done what they could, but there were limits to what anyone could control, limits to how carefully you could guard yourself. The realization left me strangely introspective. The world is full of hidden observers, waiting in plain sight, and sometimes the only defense is awareness and courage. I had been both aware and brave, but luck had played a part too, a fleeting companion in moments of danger. By evening, I was ready to leave. My suitcase zipped, my laptop packed, and my keys in hand, I paused one final time in the doorway. Room 409, once ordinary and forgettable, now held a story of terror and survival. I ran my eyes over the bed, the desk, the vent, and the smoke detector, taking mental note of every detail. I understood the power of familiarity turned sinister. The way an environment could become a trap if someone with the right skill and obsession decided it should. But I also understood my own limits, my ability to act under pressure, to defend myself with what I had at hand. Walking down the hallway, I felt the eyes of the building, the subtle awareness that came with a space that had hosted danger and survived. Guests passed me, oblivious to the events of the night, to the fact that someone had lived and moved in the vents above them, watching and planning. The ordinary and mundane had been violated, and the remnants of that violation lingered in my awareness. Yet I carried with me a sense of triumph and resilience. Room 409 would remain infamous in my mind, a reminder that survival is often a matter of timing, courage, and quick thinking. I stepped into the lobby, handed over my key, and forced a smile at the clerk, who glanced up briefly, entirely unaware of the night's events. Outside, the city stretched wide and bright, indifferent to the terror that had unfolded just floors above. I inhaled deeply, feeling the crisp air fill my lungs, and for the first time since arriving, felt the faintest sense of freedom. Room 409 had tested me, had threatened to consume me, and yet I had prevailed. The man was caught, the vent sealed, and the room restored to its deceptive calm. I walked away knowing that vigilance and action had saved me, and that the shadow of the past might linger, but it would never dominate again. If you've ever seen the History Channel's TV show Alone, you'll know that the animals our participants encounter are often some of the scariest things about the show. Sure, many starve themselves willfully or not, hook themselves in the hand, cut their legs, and whatnot, But there's nothing more dramatic than when the dark of night overcomes their camp and they hear a rustling and grumbling right outside of their shelter. But one of these moments you've never seen is the story of Timothy, who tried to fight back against his aggressor and lost. For the first time, this is his story made public. Timothy wasn't exactly our more impressive participant on the show. Many of the men tend to be burly prior military or skinny-ish survivalist hippies. Timothy was just about right in the middle, not usually someone we'd put on the show. Vegetarian, never hunted, good with tools but not particularly impressive, could start a fire with some help from his Pharaoh stick. But what he had that many candidates lacked was authenticity. He just seemed like a downright good guy, albeit insecure. So we wanted to have him on to serve up something different to our audience. In that way, he didn't disappoint. He did things differently than most participants typically do. Most participants establish a shelter first. Timothy was hungry, so he found some field with a weird-ass flower and started chowing down for a couple hours. "Can't build on an empty stomach," he said, as if he hadn't eaten right before being dropped off at his location. He then essentially built himself a mini pool of sorts, it being pretty warm in Patagonia at that time of the year. He claimed he wanted a good place to hang out, where he could be certain no fishes were going to bite his toes, where glacial fjords might not afford such confidence. It was certainly unique, if nothing else. He did eventually build a shelter, though, and it was surprisingly nice. He did a fair job at choosing the right wood, stringing it all together, using a little paracord tie everything tightly, and some foliage nicely compacted down to create an as comfortable as it can get bed. Everything seemed to be going quite well at first. But sometime around day 3, things started to get a bit weird for Timothy. He had been lying down in his shelter, just talking to the camera about whatever and whatnot when there was a rustling just on the other side of the wall. It clearly startled him. He jumped up and did the usual hey toward the sound and then silence, listening to see if it was still around. "Get out," he yelled out, and you could hear whatever it was scramble away. This isn't uncommon. After all, we're the strangers temporarily invading some other animal's territory, so it can take a couple weeks or so for both to get used to the idea of being in a new place or having someone else take up residence. Usually it goes pretty smoothly, though we'll often see a competitor or two get too scared and drop out during this time. Wildlife in Patagonia is different, though. Sure, we had giant black bears in Vancouver Island, but there's something a little different like Patagonia's puma, otherwise known as a cougar. You might not be too familiar with cougars, but are more familiar with other terms for them: mountain lion and panther. These aren't small cats the size of a puma shoe or so. These are 7 long, 200-pound predators. They're not something you want to be staring down at, especially not in the night when they can see and you can't. That's one reason Timothy was rightfully pretty skittish. To his credit, though, he didn't tap out like 2 others did. But there are times when it can be too much. They push themselves too far. Suppress the fear that keeps you alive. Timothy realized this, I assume, but maybe it was too late. The competition made him ignore the warning signs. Rustling in and of itself isn't a warning sign. That's just the animals scoping out what's going on. We've been over that. A warning sign is like that of finding a young, dead goat, drained of blood, sitting at your shelter's door, its eyes wide open in fear toward the opening. Except no sound had been made all through the prior night, and nothing was caught on the outside bringing it up and setting it there. When Timothy woke up to this sight, he was visibly shaken on camera. I would be too. Sure, my house cats bring me gifts, but this didn't have the same tone. Anthropomorphizing aside, this seemed to send some message. It was something far closer to "get off my lawn" than "here's some food, Dad." He didn't seem to get that, though. Maybe it's hindsight that makes it obvious. But for Timothy, it was a scary situation, still pretty early in the competition. That was really nothing more than an animal leaving it there by chance. But the way the goat was killed was horrific in and of itself. Timothy seemed to get the message eventually, though. Every few days thereafter, there would be something new. Large pile of scat. The lifeless body of a bloodless baby boar. Once it was a pile of small teeth. Something weird was going on at his camp. Except Timothy, instead of tapping out like most might have, decided to get to the bottom of it. The cameras, no matter how many he put out or where he put them, never really caught anything interesting outside of a flash of a tail, something around fur or quails, on the very edge of one camera view. Instead, on the night of day 86, Timothy decided to wait up for it, machete in hand. According to footage, at around 1:40 a.m., a sudden scream came from just outside of camp, accompanied by violent rustling in the direction of some heavy brush. Timothy sprang up from where he was sitting in his shelter and grabbed his flashlight in his other hand and rushed toward the entrance, leaving his emergency satellite phone behind. On one outside camera view, you could see Timothy round the front of the shelter, ready to light up the mysterious animal. As he ran just out of view of that camera, a second outside camera picked him up, still running toward the brush, accidentally running into a thick branch from a nearby tree, knocking the flashlight from his hands, dropping to the ground and illuminating the camera's view far too bright to see anything. What we heard next on the camera can't be adequately described, nor would I want to, as I'll have to live with those desperate screams, yells, and cries for the rest of my life. From what I could tell, it was over quickly, lasting about a minute between the sounds of Timothy and those of continued violent rustling. When we arrived at his camp on day 87, we found his body on the edge of camp, completely drained of blood and his organs missing, the only superficial wounds being some superficial claw marks and 3 holes in his abdomen. After finding him dead, we quickly had another crew fly over to the only other competitor still in the running and evacuated him, and later faked his crowning after a couple weeks back in the United States, after we knew everyone was safe. That's why, in the show, the winner was crowned the day after the last competitor was medically tapped. He wasn't really the runner-up. That was Timothy. Timothy was a good guy with a great heart, but sometimes things get to us, whether it's curiosity or ego or something else. For him, for the first time in his life, he was ready to face his fears, but he chose the wrong battle. We still don't know what exactly attacked Timothy. We assume it was a puma. Some locals claimed it was the chupacabra, a mythical creature they had warned us about that ruled the woods and would come out at night to attack livestock. We'll never know though, as we'll never go back to Patagonia again. After picking up all of the children for the kids' version of our TV show alone, I knew Adam was a little different than the others. As one of the producers, it was my job to validate our casting department's choice of participants, and kids are always hard to read from their Skype interviews. But when Adam showed up acting cool and calm, which was very different than his Skype interview, and from how most of the other kids acted upon meeting them at the airport, I thought that was strange. That would be just the first of many strange moments with Adam. Taping kids' versions of adult shows is somewhere between really fun and really terrifying. Alone, being a show about survival, where we've had contestants get hurt, starve themselves, and as you've read before, disappear, this fell somewhere far closer, if not over, the line of really terrifying to tape. After all, we're taking responsibility for 12 kids' well-beings. So alleviate some of our concerns, and especially the concerns of overprotective parents, we put into place special safeguards. We set up more cameras, we helped set them up, and did all the tape and battery exchanges ourselves. A flashlight and pot were part of the equipment we gave all the kids, and we would do 3x-week check-ins, instead of the weekly check-ins we instituted after the whole wool situation. But that isn't to say it's all bad, taping a kid's version. There's certain benefits to it. First, it's good ratings. They like kids. They do and say funny things. Even these kids, who were mostly pretty serious outdoors people already, hunting, foraging, and camping with their families. Plus, they're innocent. Except Adam, apparently. The Adam we met in the Skype interview was clearly nervous. Brown hair, blue eyes, freckles, small, skinny, a little on the runt side, which wasn't surprising as he was the youngest of 6 kids. Not just came from a big family, but a family big in prepping, though didn't seem to be into it as much as his dad was. Sure, he had hunted, camped, been on adventure excursions, which I gather were more like militia training sessions, but he didn't really seem to be all about it. But his dad signed him up for the casting call and arranged for the Skype session, and we thought his combined innocence and knowledge of survival tactics would play well to viewers. The Adam I picked up, though, was different. Cool, calm, and collected, as the saying goes. The nervousness was gone, not exuding any sense of innocence. It was like he was prepared, he'd been here before, was confident he'd win, and I couldn't so much as get a small laugh out of him to my terrible dad jokes. He just sat there in the passenger seat looking out the window, taking note of where we were going. The kids never met each other before the competition, and part of that was because of Adam. Unlike the other kids, all of whom flew into Vancouver proper, I picked him up at the local airport on Vancouver Island. So we never got the entire cast together before taping, which for a kid's show would have been nice to get that B-roll intro footage. He actually came in on the same day that we started taping, so half the kids were already in their spots when I picked him up, and we drove right over to the docks, where we met a film crew and headed straight to where we determined he would make camp. One of the odder parts about Adam was that he brought less than half of the things he intended to bring. The kid participants, like the adults, get to bring 10 items with them, which they buy while at home, and we reimburse them for the cost. We get a list of these items before they come, so when Adam showed up with nothing more than a hatchet, that seemed odd. But he insisted that's all he needed, and he didn't even want the flashlight and pot we gave all the kids, though we left them on shore for him along with the rest of his items when we dropped him off. But the fact that he didn't bring a sleeping bag, tent, saw, fish hooks and line, or anything else you'd normally see was odd. As I said though, we would check in on the kids 3 times per week, generally each Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday, weather permitting. And of course, each kid received a satellite phone for if they needed help or were ready to tap out. We do the same for Adam, of course, and debated checking in on some every couple days since he brought so few items. He proved us wrong though. Right from the start, he created an impressive shelter, a nice, sustainable fire, and found a hardy bush with berries that would sustain him for a few days or weeks until he found other food sources. Adam thrived where we thought he'd fail. Some other kids thrived just as well as Adam did, but then strange things started happening to them. One mysteriously lost his bow and arrows, another had a tent blown away, I guess. People lose things out in the wilderness though, especially when they accidentally drop a black ferro rod or inadvertently drop it into the fire. But then we got other strange reports from the kids. Some reported seeing another child far off in the woods, crawling around outside of camp, or even looking at them, or at least in one case, when the kid came back his camp, he heard some rustling at the edge of camp and the thing ran off quickly. But by the time the kid would go and investigate, the strange child or thing would be gone. We checked each kid's tapes and didn't see anything nefarious from any participants. None of the cheating we sometimes see or wandering off too far was happening. Even if the kids' camps were closer than the adults' camps usually were, we're still talking about miles of dense forests, creeks, rivers, and mighty hills between them. So we were fairly certain it wasn't a kid. One day, though, Adam came back from a hunt wearing coonskin cap. He didn't take that with him. He told us he found it far off in the hills. There's a lot of hunting out there, so that wasn't particularly strange. Plus, participants are told they can use anything they find. But what was strange was he came back from the same hunt with something, some type of meat we couldn't readily discern on camera. He had already butchered it and skinned it, so the most could figure was maybe it was a portion of moose thigh, a large feral hog, or something of that sort, though taking those down with nothing but a hatchet would be difficult. By the time we saw it on tape and came back to camp and asked questions, he had eaten it all and discarded the rest in the river, he told us. After that, though, we started getting reports of even stranger things happening around some kids' camps. Emily was another participant who encountered weird things. While fishing, she spotted someone on the opposite shore watching her. She called out and got nothing in return. When she looked away for a moment and then looked back, the person was gone. Later that evening, she said the person came back. A small person with brown hair ran into her camp, stole her hunting knife, and ran out. She took chase but got clotheslined by fishing wire that had been set up between 2 trees outside her camp. She didn't set it up. William, a kid near to Adam's camp, woke up being strangled by someone on top of him. He struggled and passed out, and when he awoke he found his camp on fire. He got out and couldn't find his satellite phone, and had to flag down a fishing boat that was passing by, who got in touch with us. We wanted to check the tapes, of course, to figure out who did it and what happened, but the fire melted everything, and even caught about an acre of woods on fire. He chose to drop out of the competition even after we said we'd help him find a new camp. The strangest thing to happen, though, was when some being appeared at several camps at the same time. 3 different kids, spaced out about 8 miles from each other, reported seeing the same thing at the same time. A small person with brown hair peering in their direction from outside of camp, and immediately afterwards a fire came from that direction and spread into camp, forcing them out, at which time the small being chased after them for miles, while they could hear the zooms of arrows fly past them. It was bizarre. It was at that time we decided to go ahead and end the competition and taping. Something weird was going on and we couldn't explain it, and we were legitimately worried about some type of predator, human or otherwise, stalking the children. When we got to Adam's camp, he was gone. We waited around for him to come back while the other kids were picked up by other crew members. Very late that night, Adam finally returned, and we told him we had ended the competition and would be sending everyone back home, which Adam didn't react to. We took everyone back to a hotel to rest for the night, let their parents know that we ended the taping, and arrange for tickets. After I dropped Adam off at his hotel room, I called his parents to let them know he would be returning the next day. "What do you mean Adam will be returning tomorrow?" his dad said on the phone. "Yeah, we had to end the competition early since we were concerned for the kids' well-being with incoming bad weather," I told him, brushing off the real concern. "I don't understand," his dad replied. "Adam has been here at home the entire time." Thanks for watching, everyone. If you'd like to support us, do hit that subscribe button and like this video. This really helps with our channel growth. So, see you tomorrow at the same time.